GARMIN, who now own Tacx, today announced firmware updates for both the NEO 2T and the NEO 3M smart trainers that bring both Zwift Virtual Shifting support and 10Hz race mode to those trainers. I've put both of those trainers through my virtual shifting test protocol today, and I'll cut straight to the chase and say the 3M and the 2T provide hands down the best shifting experience that I've had on Zwift to date. That's both on my road bike and the Zwift RIDE frame. So virtual shifting on Zwift is a feature that simulates the feeling of changing gears while you remain in the one same physical gear. Zwift handles all the gear changes and sends the gear change command to the trainer to adjust the resistance based on your virtual gear selection. Virtual shifting requires the trainer to be paired over Bluetooth, and shifting is done via Zwift Click, the Zwift Play controllers, or with the Zwift RIDE smart frame. Now this works with a standard cassette or a Zwift cog. I believe they're selling the 18-tooth variant with the Neos, but you do not need to buy the cog to take advantage of this. Firmware versions on the NEO 2T is 2.5.0 or higher. On the 3M, you'll need system firmware 9.26. That's installed via the Tacx Training mobile app. Now, the Zwift RIDE is not compatible with the NEO 3M. That's due to the narrow chainstays on the Zwift RIDE frame. Quickly touching on race mode before we jump on the bike and have a look at this. Race mode is 10 Hz power data. The Neos were always 4 Hz over BLE, so it's now just over 2 times more responsive. Great in sim mode, you press the pedals, the number bounces straight up. In erg mode, in workouts, it jumps around a little bit, but I'll show you a workaround for that in just a few moments. Data is always saved at 1 Hz, so this is just a real-time interaction with the game using race mode. When it comes to virtual shifting, it's one thing to be compatible with Zwift Virtual Shifting at a protocol level, and it's another thing to provide a good user experience. There are a number of different trainer types on the market that provide resistance in a slightly different or sometimes very different way, and that means an on-bike user experience can differ greatly. My virtual shifting test protocol that I put trainers through includes basic gear change responsiveness. If you press the button, can you feel the gear change and is it quick? It's then onto Titans Grove and its longer rolling sim terrain to see how that interacts with sim mode and gear changes. I then perform a gear step test at 0% sim gradient where I change from gear 1 through to gear 24, changing one gear every 20 seconds to see how virtual shifting responds. It's then over to the balloon fields in France and the quick changing roller coaster section where the road and gradients switch from positive to negative very quickly. And lastly, it's onto a steep sim gradient test in a London underground to determine if there's any issues with the trainer resistance at low flywheel speed and high torque. All right, that's the protocol. Let's first look at the 3M on my road bike before switching to the 2T on the Zwift RIDE. For the testing of the NEO 3M, I'm using my road bike, standard cassette, everything paired via Bluetooth, and as soon as I turn the cranks, the power numbers bounce up under power source. Watch this again. I just turn the cranks 90 degrees, bang. Power numbers are extremely responsive. So race mode under Zwift is working very, very well. I have the play controllers configured as well as the Zwift Click for this session. All right, let's jump on to, we'll get into Titans Grove and see how responsive these gear changes are. And as I click up and down, I had one of those oh wow moments. The way they've implemented these gear changes is, well, it's done exceptionally well. When you change a gear, there's a slight dead spot or zero resistance before the gear then kicks in, just like what it feels like when you change a gear on a real cassette and the chain jumps down or jumps up and changes cogs. The responsiveness, well, as soon as I was pressing the buttons, the gears changed on screen and I could feel that on the trainer. There was next to no lag. Well, it felt instantaneous. This was the quickest gear changes I've ever experienced on Zwift with the play controllers and this virtual shifting. So, look, early on, I was extremely impressed, but I still had to put it through all its paces. Okay, over top of the climb on Titans Grove, it was a good ride up, nice and smooth, wasn't too jagged. The physical gearing was fine. I chose the small ring on the front, mid cassette up the back, and I'm just testing the virtual shifting through negative gradients. Now, on some trainers with virtual shifting and negative gradients, you just don't feel anything happening. You don't know what's going on. With this, with that simulated gear jump that the trainer is doing, you can see me spinning up and down at different cadences. It feels like you're really riding a bike. You can tell when you've changed a gear, regardless of the resistance the next gear, either up or down, is providing. You know when that change has happened, and it just triggers something like a memory from riding outdoors, I guess. I don't know. It's one of these things you'll need to experience, but that's a definite pass in my books for the sim gradient test through Titans Grove. Now on to my 0% sim gradient step test through each gear, changing gears every 20 seconds and trying to hold relatively the same cadence. Now I'm using 1 through 24 sequential gears. I typically don't get to 24, because the resistance gets a little too hard. But what I want to know is, where can I feel those gear changes start to take place? And where does the resistance start to step up? Gear change number 1 here, from 1 to 2, my climbing gears on the flats. And you can see that grey little peak just there. That's that feel of the gear shift. So even though the resistance remains relatively the same, or pretty much the same in these climbing gears, I knew that that gear change had taken place. All right, we're 3 seconds off next gear. Changing to gear number 3 right here. And again, spike in power, just like it is when you change a physical gear. And away we go. All right, let me speed this up through to whatever gear I get to. I think it's about 16 or 17. And you'll see that these gear changes, well, they do very, very well on the 3M. Okay, so it's around gear 5 or 6 where the power starts coming up, but on every change is that little jump in gears that you feel. It's not too much, it's not annoying. It's really easy to overcome with this resistance unit. It just sort of spikes in and drops back out, just like a gear change. Gear 12, gear 13, gear 14. Okay, now we're talking, and I think it's gear 16 I top out on for today's ride. But that slight stepping up on every single gear change from, well, actually looking at this a little closer, probably gear 3 or 4 that it starts stepping up from. But this was the best results that I've had with any virtual shifting trainer so far to date. So allowing the full suite, 24 gears being usable on 0% means it's going to work in pretty much all terrains. All right, gear 16, gear 17, I don't quite make it. Here's when my testing falls apart, when my legs just can't keep up. But that gives us a good indication that this trainer is absolutely more than capable of providing the resistance and that gear shift feel on any terrain. Before hitting the balloon fields, just a quick erg test, and it appears race mode, well, doesn't go back to 1 Hz. Some trainers with race mode will go back to 1 Hz in workout or erg mode to stop that number jumping around, but that's bouncing around quite a bit on screen. Switching your power display back to 3-second average will really smooth that out. So if you're using this update, there we go. Back to 270, locked on. Much better. So I'd like to see that revert back to 1 Hz in erg mode. There's no need for race mode in erg. Typically erg, you want a nice steady set point to chase rather than that number bouncing up and down at 4 or 10. I think it was 10 before. I'm not quite sure on that. But anyway, if you're using this update, you want smoother erg on screen for workout modes, use the 3-second average, and away you go. A little further up the road, and this is a stress test for any trainer resistance unit using virtual shifting, real shifting, whatever. This is the bloom fields that goes from, well, we're seeing on screen here, 4%, 1%, 0%, 1%, 2%. You'll see it go up and down, 4%. And it's when it starts hitting these negative gradients as well that trainers go from positive to negative gradient. And you've got to chase those gears through that resistance. Now, virtual shifting can be a strange beast because, well, virtual shifting, it's just changing the resistance. But sim mode is also changing the resistance. So with this up and down roller coaster that you're seeing on screen, if you're chasing those gears and that gear feel isn't quite there, you feel lost. With this, again, as you'd expect, based on my last few minutes, this was absolutely phenomenal through this section. The sim gradient changes were nice and smooth, they weren't too abrupt, and the gear changes had that little dunk, that little feel to the pedals, so you know you've changed gears, and it instantly changes that resistance either up or down. So again, this is the best experience that I've had through this stress test of any trainer that I've used with, well, real shifting or virtual shifting. This was absolutely brilliant. Pressing those buttons, bang, resistance changed, the sim gradient changing in the background. It's just like riding a bike. Well, as close as riding a bike can be, I guess, when you're indoors. On to the final test of my virtual shifting test protocol, and this one is checking for virtual flywheel slip, typically an area where these trainers don't do too well. That is on very steep sim gradients, relatively slow flywheel speeds, and high torque efforts. So putting in a short, hard effort just here, spikes up. It was sustaining that resistance, no problems at all. I try a few more times to push through that gear and really spin that out. Wasn't occurring. The physical gear here had the flywheel at enough RPM that it was able to provide all the resistance that I needed to punch up that. So that's the Neo 3M passing my tests with flying colours. It was phenomenal. Like, to be honest, I've not had a product worked this well, well, for a very long time. This was great. Bit of an issue that I encountered when installing the RIDE frame on the Neo 2T, which it is technically compatible with. It needs a bigger foot or a longer foot or a little riser. Thank you to Elite for that riser being within reach. Okay. And the reason is the very narrow chainstays on the Zwift RIDE smart frame. But luckily, with a bit of elevation at the front, problem solved. Okay, I promised to make this one a little quicker because you've seen the protocol, you know what it's all about. Let's just look at the results. So we have the Neo 2T updated with the firmware, the Zwift cog with a 19-tooth cog on the back. Again, I believe it ships with the 18. Race mode check, once paired via Bluetooth, and yeah, it's in the phenomenal category again. Watch this. Push. And yeah, as soon as I clip in and press the pedals, those numbers bounce straight up. So race mode working extremely well. Okay, I did promise a speed run through this to save some time, so spinning through the gears. Gear responsiveness was no problems at all. Up out of the saddle when I needed to. Punchy resistance. And then bringing that back down, clicking through the gears. It just worked as expected. Sim gradients, nice and responsive over Bluetooth, and response to those gear changes again. Absolutely brilliant. So 12, 13, 14, pouring on the resistance, going up, pushing back on the pedals, changing down a few gears. Look, it just worked. As it should, as you expect. Wasn't chasing gears, the resistance was known, the gear changes were felt. Out of the saddle there, pushing over. So that's another tick box for this firmware update, providing a great user experience in the longer sim gradients and gear changes through Titan's Grove. Alrighty, hold tight for the speed run through the step test of gears. Every gear change providing a slight spike in resistance, but nothing too harsh. Just letting you know that you've changed gears, and every single gear just providing a little bit more resistance as it steps up and steps up through the climbing gears. And as we start hitting gear 9, 10, 11, there we go, it's starting to spike up now. Getting a little harder U-turn there so I don't get into any positive or negative sim gradients, all on 0% sim. Stepping up, stepping up, stepping up, and it's about here where my legs give in. But again, that's a pass for this section. Good stuff. Similar to the Neo 3M with this race mode update, the Neo 2T also is a little jumpy here in workout mode or erg mode. I'd love to see this again switch to 1 Hz by default in erg or workout mode like a few other trainers, but you know the solution for this. You can jump in, switch that to 3-second average if you like, or deal with the numbers jumping around. Bloomfield speed run, and all is well here too. Those gear changes and gradient changes are easily distinguishable, and that's a pass. And lastly, on to the steeper gradient sim test with the Neo 2T. I was a little nervous for the 2T here. However, the T does stand for torque, so it should be able to handle a little bit more torque. I've just moved the graphic up a little bit so you can see the spike in power that's going to occur as soon as I hit this steeper sim gradient. Gear 2, can I accelerate out of that and push through? It's fine. It's providing more than enough consistent resistance. Pushing through here, I was able to slip it out and pedal in squares. Look, that's about it, everyone. GARMIN Tacx, you win. You win. This is absolutely phenomenal. Alrighty, there we are. As the results show, both trainers passed my virtual shifting test with flying colours, providing the most responsive and realistic virtual shifting I've ever experienced from a smart trainer on Zwift. The Neo resistance technology was way ahead of its time. When released just under 10 years ago, it's good to see it perform so well with these new updates. And with that, there's not much more to cover. I am keen though to see how it goes for others. If you own a 3M or a 2T, again, you don't need the Zwift cog, just a click or a play controller of sorts to change gears, and you can do the update and see how it goes for you. It's also optional too, so if you do the update and don't like it, you can just use a standard cassette and take advantage of race mode. And with that, that's a wrap. Thanks for watching. I'll be back with more soon.